Hello, everyone. This is Belinda Carr. Welcome back to the Movers and Breakers podcast, where we dive into the world of construction and explore the stories of people and companies who are shaping the future of our industry. From the latest innovations to the challenges and triumphs of everyday professionals, we bring you the inside scoop of what's happening in construction. Today, I'm speaking with Sophia Lopez, Regional Head of Projects and Implementation at COBOD. Thanks for joining us, Sophia.
Thank you.
So we connected, I don't know, was it 2020 or 2021? We actually chatted for a little while. That was your first step into the 3D concrete printing world. And I think you were organizing like an a webinar of everyone who was in 3D printing. I don't know, it's kind of vague right now.
Yeah, that's true. That was in 2021. And it was for women in 3D printing.
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, Women in 3D Printing, it's an organization that is dear to my heart. I mean, it's obviously supporting the community and so on, but they didn't have anyone particularly in construction. So as I was getting involved, I noticed that there was like this aerospatial, and then there's this medical field. And then I asked, hey, would it be possible if you gather people from the construction industry? And back then I was in the gas and oil industry. So I was like, yes, of course, why not? So that's how it came to be that I reached out to all of these female leaders in the community, and they did the podcast with us. It was like a webinar. It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it was very, very nice. Like everyone was very open to say, what it is to be and how can we inspire others. So it was very, very good.
You have a pretty interesting career path because you started off in the architecture industry. I believe you have a bachelor's in architecture.
Correct.
But then you moved into oil and gas, and then you developed this passion for 3D concrete printing, which led to your current role at COBOD. How did you carve that sort of very unconventional career path for yourself?
Well, I knew since a very early stage that I wanted to do something related with 3D printing. So this is before even taking my bachelor's in architecture. I discovered there was 3D printing. I had this passion for architecture, and I thought one day I would love to do that applied to construction, but it was not there yet. So I thought it's going to take some 10 years to develop, some 7 years to develop from the time I started thinking about it. And then it was just, kind of a lab thing. So I stick to my, let's say, my normal path. And I got into heavy duty construction because there was this American group coming to Mexico for the railroad and the gas and oil industry. And they needed live translators for technical matters. So I would actually live translate for the builders with the American firms. And then it became so useful that they actually passed me to many other departments on the gas and oil section. And I learned a bunch. Then it was in projects, like full-time projects. And then I was in operations. So I had like this full circle. And then I was hired by a multinational company for the kind of like a bigger role with more facilities. And just throughout those years, that experience, I noticed it was very frustrating in terms of like material theft. And this were many different experiences in many different places. But I noticed that there was always this schedule that was never followed because there was always delays because of something. Like someone in the chain had become like backlogged, and then it was like a chain reaction. Exactly. And I noticed there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. Like it's impossible that you quote effectively with this system. And I started to ask around like, hey, what's your experience? And then I started to learn a lot of how the traditional rational thinking of the construction industry works. And they would explain to me that, some contractors would actually delay their work because they had already hired a crew. So they would wait to have a connecting project in order to move that same crew and not lose people that has a very specialized trade into going back to their hometowns or something.
Wow.
So I was like, wow. And I could tell you like 20, 25, 30 different aspects that would link to this inefficiencies. And I thought, well, it all comes down to time. So the more the more you shrink your project line, the higher chances of success you'll have. And that had to do with 3D printing. That was just 3D printing. And there's also the prefab world, which is also very effective in terms of shrinking time. But the prefab world has to do with shipping. And during the pandemic and so on, shipping became an issue as well.
Yeah, exponential costs.
Exactly. So then you start to see, well, I mean, does that make sense? Also, some type of prefab solutions that are very effective in some countries are not accessible in other countries because your import-export shipping costs from the place of production to the place of actually the implementation would just kill that solution. So I kept watching and watching, and I was just every year I would have a new project. So and I was just watching, and it became so obvious to me that I stopped getting so excited about what I was doing, and it was just very obvious that I had to.
I guess you were just frustrated with all the inefficiencies and the delays, and no one seemed to be losing enough money or worried about anything enough to actually do something about it. They just accepted it as the norm.
Exactly. They would just accept it. So, for example, if you talk about the railroad, right? The railroad has been there for hundreds of years. So I would say, hey, why haven't they changed the rail design in order to hook it to the rail and prevent derailment in some areas that I just constantly see happening? And they would say, oh, because, it has been working like that since forever. And then I would be like, yeah, but, could it be improved? And they were like, yeah, but it has been working like that forever. And then I would be like, okay. And it's kind of that traditional type of mindset that sometimes takes a lot to change. Yeah. And I understand it because of terms of safety regulations on, but it gets to a point where you're like, count how much money you've lost because of that. And then, rethink about if it works to continue that way. And it just became very, very obvious that I just needed something more. I needed like a mindset that was way more open to the future. And gas and oil in some ways, it's still very efficient for some areas, but I just needed technology. I just needed to move forward. And this made total sense with this.
So when you transition from oil and gas or traditional construction to 3D concrete printing, I'm sure there were a lot of lessons that you brought with you, because obviously, like everything that you're saying, these are all first-hand experiences. You even just talked about appreciation for regulations and safety requirements and all that stuff. So you still have all that in the back of your mind while you start this new journey into 3D concrete printing.
Yeah, of course. It's basically, I would put myself as a customer for this industry. And I would say, okay, I'm from the traditional construction business. How do I adapt this? And meeting the customer gives a very open and thorough view about the areas that are not clear, about the areas that need a specific transition to understand better, and things that make sense, things that don't make sense, or things that we need to pay more attention to it. And I think it's a natural progression of the technology. Yeah. As it gets more and more used, but like if you rent this equipment, what's the equivalent of renting this equipment? Like it's so many different things. If you buy this equipment, what's the equivalent of buying this equipment? If let's say you want a painter, how much access to a painter do you have versus how much access to a printer operator specialist do you have? Like all of those, let's say, points of contact. And and
comparisons too, because that's what I appreciate about COBOD. And I've said this in many of my discussions with people. They have a very realistic approach. They're not just spouting off all these like up in the air ideas that they want to make this technology viable and they want to make it cost competitive and they want to supplement construction. They're not trying to completely disrupt the construction industry, but they want to make it a solid competitor to traditional construction. And hiring someone like you that has a very balanced view and is looking at, like you said, cost concerns or like how do you acquire a 3D printer versus acquiring traditional tools. That's why you were brought to the table, because you provide that realistic perspective to make 3D printing viable.
Yeah, and it's very exciting. Like the whole, I would say the whole team in COBOD, because we're a very international company, is just very refreshing. Like you have people from all over the world, from different aspects of construction, from different aspects of 3D printing, and we all complement each other. But I would say that the number one thing that I think makes a big difference is the communication. So we actually ask, like, is this feasible to our customers? Like, is this realistic as well? So we analyze ourselves, and then we also ask our customers in the regions, because each region is different, right? Construction is extremely local in many different ways. So our technology can only service in the point that it gets adopted by each local group. And that's what's exciting, that there's so much to learn and so much to develop and so many people to help. Like if you think about having a purpose in life and really like how we see work versus how work was seen before, you really want to be part of something bigger than yourself. And I think the 3D printing industry, understanding, like the cost of living of houses, like the having a house is basically the retirement plan for the US and in many other countries. That's your retirement plan. And the fact that you cannot access a home anymore because it's so cost prohibitive, or because of markets rising or whatever other situation happening in the economy, it's worrying. And you see friends and you see like very real people that cannot access that, and you say, what can we do differently? And I think that's the exciting, that's what, like,
You actually make an impact. Yeah,
exactly, in the morning to say, this is just not 9 to 5, this is like, and the whole group feels this way.
yeah.
Which is exciting.
The tricky thing about COBOD is that like you mentioned earlier, it's a global technology. Your team is global. You're not thinking about just you at your office in Miami. It's about how can we make a change to this technology or improvement to our printer that we can apply globally. But when I say it's tricky, it's because to adopt this technology universally, you have to overcome a lot of language barriers, a lot of local traditions and customs. And you've taken a very interesting approach, or COBOD has taken a very interesting approach to encourage that wide adoption. And you mentioned this during our discussion last week. You said y'all are moving to a more graphical approach, which is, it's kind of like the IKEA, it's the IKEA mindset, right? Why have all this text to put this thing together? Let's just show it through diagrams. So it's a universal language.
Yeah, exactly. So we're very excited about it. You can see that I think you noticed our conversation earlier, but so language barrier and international adoption is just the fact that if you look at these big brands, you look at brands that are very international, you will immediately notice that it needs to be cross-cultural. And if you think about how many people read a book in a daily basis versus how many people watches Netflix on a daily basis, you'll notice that the information and how we communicate and how we absorb information in a very digested way has evolved into being graphic. Like all these Instagram, all this, it used to be text, then it used to be pictures, then it used to be video. Now it's, so all of the augmented reality and everything is like image based and so on. It just makes sense.
So I believe y'all even have you've even developed a software where y'all simulate how a building is constructed, and that kind of supplements your approach to like a graphical approach. It's almost telling people it's helping them imagine how the machine's going to come together, how their home's going to be 3D printed. Have people been really excited? What's the reception been like for that software that you've developed? And what's the name of the software, by the way?
One, it's proprietary, like
Okay.
it's called COBOD configurator. I mean, it's an internal development, let's say. Two, it's accessible through our website, so it's not like so really check it out. And three, it has an amazing response all over the world. So if you YouTube COBOD, and you're going to see like hundreds of videos about our printer being used and deployed on the field. And that's great because those are like proof of concepts, the like construction. It's not only, let's say, a render in terms of information, but the configurator allows you to configure the printer to the size that you want to buy and then simulate a printing process. And this simulator, it's so good to understand because in a video you can deep dive into a lot of technical details and the experience of the general contractor and so on. But in the configurator, you kind of understand the overall picture. And it's very important for, governments that are adopting it, local authorities to understand it, people that is talking with investors, people that is talking with designers, it's just like an overall clean view of how the technology works. And it's something that should be celebrated because to my knowledge, it's the world's first. Like I haven't seen any other type of simulation in terms of deploying or explaining how technology works to this level of detail. And it's convenient. It just makes sense,
It's like it's the first way of grasping how this building is going to be built. Like you said, it's if someone hasn't been introduced to technology, instead of explaining the technology to the person or showing them how the nozzle, material comes out of the nozzle. No, you just show them this rendering or this time lapse of how it occurs, and they get it. It's an easier way for them to grasp this new technology. That's pretty exciting. So you're actually more on the technical side in 3D concrete printing, right? So I have to ask you this because I get this question almost every other day. How expensive is 3D concrete printing, like compared to traditional construction?
Well,
I know it's very difficult to say that because it depends regionally, but some people say it's cheaper than traditional construction. Some people, and then when they dive into the numbers, it turns out to be far more. So when you're approaching a project, is COBOD trying to be cost competitive? Are you slightly higher than traditional construction? What's the range? What's the range compared to local construction?
Well, I mean, we have different answers for that same question, because we have operations, or not ours, but our customers have operations in different parts of the world. And different parts of the world have different labor costs, have different material costs, and have different implications in terms of design. So some people would say it's 40% cheaper than traditional construction. Some other people would say it's 20% cheaper than traditional construction. And some people won't be able to just specifically confirm the comparison because of the design that they're printing is just not feasible with traditional construction today, as it is. So that's kind of a range, but there's also an additional layer of understanding, which is when you have the economies of scale. So when you have a printer that is able to print, the same printer is able to print 8 homes, 10 homes, what is your return of investment based on that equipment? And there's a very good case study in Africa with one of our customers that just finished building all of these homes. I think it was like 10 homes with one printer. And that situation is important to note because you're using that equipment in a way where it's doing kind of like a production line with one equipment versus having, a bunch of equipment in one line and each of them individually printing one item because your upfront cost is higher. That's for example, a different scenario. Or another scenario would be if you compare how resources are locally provided for a specific type of construction versus actually bringing the machine to print in a remote area. If you bring the machine to print in a remote area, it will clearly be more cost effective than if you don't have resources in that section, because bringing all of your contractors, it will be like virtually impossible or cost prohibitive in certain cases. So it really depends. And I don't say this just because, that's like comfortable answer. I really say it because we've asked this question internally and we constantly fight to know that answer. But until we have, let's say, a specific building that we have all the data in terms of, let's say, timber, with all the hours, with all the permitting, all the soft cost, like design, permitting, all of these things, and then we 3D print the exact same geometry, and we compare those. And I don't know, it would also need to depend if that unit has been built in a lot of units, and if this building is going to be printed in different units, you will have that very like clear cost for that specific region for that specific time, because construction materials also change over time.
I love how you answer that question, because that's what I tell people. They always want a one-word answer. Yes, it's cheaper. Yes, it's more expensive. No, it's the same. I say you can't simplify it like that, because there are so many factors. Like you said, regional costs, labor costs, material costs, even time. Like at this moment in time, it might be cheaper, but in a month from now, it might be more expensive. There are so many variables involved. You cannot give just one simple answer that, even though that's what people want. So I really appreciate the way you answered that question.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I would even say that this is the same applicable situation for traditional construction.
Yeah.
Like it's not different from it, because I bought material at the beginning of the year just to store it in a warehouse for traditional construction in order to not have the inflation hit the original budget or like the quote that I provided for that project. And then throughout the year, those materials increase in cost. And at the end of the year, if I had to quote the same, it will be completely different. But then that means that you also have a storage cost.
Yes.
And that means that depending on the country you're doing this, you could have theft costs. So, I mean, there's so many situations that have to do with the traditional way of quoting that is important. This is why timing is so critical. Because if you plan in advance so well, then you become like a plan master. Then your execution time, because it's shorter, then that will be very cost effective. If you manage to plan in advance, because planning, it's tricky with a lot of variables in construction, and that's just the way the trade is. But as we automate more and more tasks, we'll have more and more control over that timeline.
Yeah, it's a very good point. But there's actually a funny story when you talk about storing materials. My husband and I, we're renovating our house, and we tore down a lot of studs, and we gutted our master bathroom, and we bought studs from Home Depot last year or something, and they were like $8 per stud or $9 per stud.
Yes.
And now they're down to like $3. So yeah, at Home Depot. So it's actually reversed, but that was just like the blip in lumber prices. But I completely understand what you're saying with the rise. There are a lot of other materials that have gone up in price, whether it's drywall or mud or all these other things. So it's just there's so many things to consider.
Usually that reversed situation that you mentioned, it's the exception.
Yes.
Because you would normally find that most of the materials go up, and then that exception, when it goes down, you would kind of want to prepare for the worst case scenario instead of, finding that you did same, which is always good. But in terms of the probabilities, you wouldn't know.
It's very rare something like that happens.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so another question for you. I recently published a video on YouTube about the difference between a block laying machine and 3D concrete printing. And I compared it on different levels. And I love y'all at COBOD because y'all appreciate objective analysis, and there are other people from other 3D printing companies who saw that video as kind of an attack on 3D concrete printing. But when I spoke to you and the other people in your team, you all said, yeah, go for it. Question all these stuff. Talk about it. Let's discuss all these things. Let's break down all these communication barriers. It's not, y'all appreciate it when communication is, I don't know, y'all just encourage communication. And I love that about your team. But there was one particular thing I said in the video about cold joints. And
Yes.
Christine Williamson, who's a building scientist, had explained that in her Instagram video. So could you explain or break down the myths behind those cold joints? Like when y'all cure a couple of layers of concrete and then you'll have a fresh pour over that. Is that a concern or not?
Okay, so first of all, structural design per project is something that you need to consider when you are in a very early stage of your project. And the reason why you need to consider it with your architect and your structural engineer according to local code is because earthworks, local code, like weather conditions in your area and requirements are very different from area to area. So cold joints specifically is something that your structural analysis would bring up in terms of your production plan. So when you're in production mode, which is printing mode, you also have a schedule of how much you're going to print. And that schedule will tell you which elements are going to be deferred from the next and the next and the next element. And those situations can be mitigated with either bonding agents and the specific data that you have for the bonding agent efficiency with your material. And it also mitigated with horizontal reinforcement and vertical reinforcement. So how you tackle those elements, which you know that will be there based on your production plan, it's dependent on your structural specifications. But there are many different ways to tackle them. It's just a matter of having them in mind when you're designing. And this is no different than what you would do in a normal type of casted pouring element. If you have a cast that goes to a certain level, and then you'll have a different cast after. Okay. You just prepare for it. Yeah. And it's part of that design. It also, like if you look at the nozzle design has a zigzag situation where your layer has some type of elements that pre-prepare that layer to
for the next layer above it. Okay.
I mean, it's all about how you prepare for that and how you have these conversations during your planning stage. So you have planning, printing, and after printing. And the planning stage, like in many other construction projects, is huge. And then your execution stage should be shorter because you have a time reduction. And then your post-processing. And each one of these cases should consider those specific elements in how you treat a cold joint in advance, during printing operations, and after printing operations. So it's just part of the conversation since day one.
You're prepared. Your answers are so thorough and so.
I mean, we're very excited about this. Like when I say that we generally speak a lot about internally, we generally speak a lot about these things because we had those same questions back in the day as well, and we're just constantly preparing to overcome those and just get through that. Okay, there's a situation, we solve it next. Yeah. There's a situation, we solve it next, and then we prepare so those things don't happen in the future again. And we can communicate to customers how to solve them. Because these are genuine questions from all construction, general construction. If it's a concern for you, it's most likely a concern for other people that is also trying to understand this technology. So this reasoning can only make us better. Yeah. That's kind of like if if someone has a question, we're going to answer it. And if we don't have the answer, we're going to develop it. Because at the end, the trend, the historical humanity trend is just to get better.
Yeah.
There are some setbacks, but right now we just want to get better, and we want to address all concerns, just get that past that situation, and just what's next,
Yeah.
and what's next, and what's next. So you will notice that we had like first floor, and second floor, and then third floor, and we just, okay, so what's next?
Yeah.
It's very important for us because at the end, the also another exciting thing, right, is like the doors that this technology opens is a possibility to experience spaces, experience the spaces that you've never experienced before. I mean, how exciting is that?
Yeah.
Right?
That's
It's
true.
like an architectural
It's not just in the computer, it's not a rendering, it's an actual space that you can walk through.
Yeah.
So speaking about actual spaces, there are like a typical 3D concrete printed home or wall has this like sausage layered look, and it can be absolutely beautiful, but it can also get a little tedious. Has COBOD developed solutions to that for people who want a more smoother finish, or do you provide alternatives?
Yeah, of course. There's like this flaps that are mechanically placed that they would just cut that excess of that effect, that sausage effect, and that sausage effect or pancake effect. A lot of people call it different ways. It's basically because that material that creates this curve will also generate one is extra material. So if you cut it and you recycle it in many creative ways that we have seen, you can also kind of use it for other type of things within your construction decoration elements. Nothing structural, but if you recycle those items when you cut them through. And then another thing is that those create pockets, and those pockets is, let's say if you have these pockets in the kitchen, they might gather some type of oil
Grease
or
or
whatever. Yeah,
dust.
exactly. So you can recover them. I mean, right now, either you use slabs, or then after you use slabs or whatever, you decide that you only want to keep that visual in certain areas, you can do that too. It's nothing like we say, no, you can only use this texture. We say, hey, like these are the possibilities, you do you, and then whatever works best for you for your finite element adoption in the market, or to the specific goal that you have for this building. There's people that says, no, I really like this texture and I want to communicate the texture, and then I want to clean it periodically and whatever. And we say, hey, if that
It's
works
up
for
to you
you,
if that's
it's
what you
up to
want.
you.
Yeah.
Like the beauty of this buildings is that, or at least on the layer based situation, is that you can walk past the 3D printed building, and if the layers are exposed, you'll know that it's 3D printed. But then there's also the opposite, right? If I just want to be like extremely cost effective, and I don't care if it's 3D printed or if it's built with whatever, but I just want to be cost effective and efficient, I could, cover the complete thing and you would never notice that it's 3D printed. It's just, comes down to, does it have a permit to be inhabited and so on, and then that's it. As long as the regulars are good and you can inhabit it, if it was done with that or brick or whatever, then
Doesn't
you're
matter. Yeah.
good. Yeah.
So you're an excellent communicator. Like all these
Thanks.
questions I've thrown at you are concerns and all. You're excellent at explaining it, and you don't get defensive. You're a really good communicator, Sophia. But I have to ask, you're a young individual in the construction industry that's typically more established, older people in the industry. You and your team, I assume all of y'all are around the same age. Y'all are youngsters and driven and passionate about this new thing. How do you deal with naysayers or doubters that say, oh, you don't know how the construction industry works. You don't know. You're too young to know all this stuff. How do you deal with that? Because you're an excellent communicator, but how do you get past that barrier?
Well, we've had certain cases where people that have, let's say, more experience try to say that we don't really know what we're talking about. And that is something that I've dealt throughout my entire career because I was also involved with the railroad and I was also involved with gas and oil. So, as a young female that comes in and says, hey, this is what we're going to do, is not always very welcome in certain areas. And at the end, it comes down to the end result. Like, I can say, hey, this is the safety recommendation. And then some people would say, how can you tell me about safety? Like, how do you think I don't know? And so on. And then it's crystal clear that it should be implemented in certain items. Or, how are you going to come and explain me how to do something related with 3D printing if I've been doing it for the past 5 years or 7 years? And in that case, which is also a different scenario, we say, hey, it's completely reasonable and respectable that you have all of these paths, but the technology is always evolving and it's evolving so fast that we can also learn new ways that will overcome certain issues that you've experienced 2 weeks ago that
That's
we
true.
now learn from an international community that can be done easier, faster, cheaper, better. And if they want to adopt that, they're more than welcome to do this collaboration. And if they don't, at some point, they will realize based on results that it is a reasonable solution. So we try not to get too much stuck in that aspect because we know it's there and we know that construction is traditional. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And I think this is not only happening in construction, like gas and oil, railroad. It happens in many different areas where expertise has shifted from being very, very stiff to being very, very organic and being open-minded and humble enough to say, hey, I am able to learn and I am able to become flexible and understand that there's better ways to do the same thing. And that's what we try to do. Does it work all the time? Maybe, maybe yes, maybe no. But at least I think the approach is that as soon as you get into it, you understand that it's so dynamic that most people that maybe started with a kind of like a negative overview or saying no, then they kind of learn very quickly. Yeah, they learn very quickly that you do have to be a little bit more open-minded to make things better because it's just the way it is.
So well, for one, finding the right client is also really important, someone who's going to work with you. But for two, you can't just turn down a client because they're difficult to deal with. You have to learn how to deal with them. And do you feel like you get a good enough support from COBOD in those kind of instances? They empower you to go and assist you if you need assistance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's some cases where it has been, like very specific for whatever reason. And we all support each other. We really all support each other. Like, hey, can we switch the strategy here? Or can we shift the focus to become productive on this side? And then time will tell. At some point, like what we really want is if that information was useful or not is based on how that customer is advancing. And at the end is and why is advancing or why is not advancing. That's also an analysis.
That you all do internally and you convey all that information with the rest of your team. That's important.
We want all customers to succeed.
Yeah.
So when there's a specific customer that is not succeeding, there's a special area of interest on which are those reasons. And how can we support and inform and retrain or in certain aspects. And it works. It just works.
Yeah. So this has been an amazing discussion and you've taught me a lot in 30 minutes. Thank you. But do you have any advice for any other young individuals who are interested in the future of the construction industry? Because you identify 3D concrete printing as something that can really help our industry, transform it for the better. But there are a lot of other things out there in the construction industry that can help us all. So what advice would you have for someone who wants to pursue that sort of alternative path?
So my advice to young people, or even not so young people, or even old people that really want to be involved in construction innovation, I think that it's a matter of understanding what's the outcome. What do we? And you don't pursue the future just for the future's sake. You want something that it's easier, that is better, that is faster, that is cleaner, that is more efficient, then that it just makes sense, and that it's easy to use, that it's fun. And at the end, I think we all want that. When we think about a better future in the construction field, we don't say, I want it to be harder
Yeah.
and dirtier and
And more
always think,
expensive.
yeah, exactly, and we're expensive. I mean, we all think about ways of making our own existence in the construction industry easier. And either if that's with this material or that material or that method or this other method, it ultimately comes down to a construction toolkit. Basically, like, how do you implement technologies from across different spaces that would make your end result easier, faster, better, cleaner, safer, everything.
Cheaper, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because that's what we want from all products, or at least within each people industry. You want to look for the future for something better. And if that is a combination of different technologies until that technology is completely unified, so be it. But I mean, there's obviously a trend. Like if you think about phones actually brought in together a lot of different activities and made something functional. I think 3D printing will try to pull from many different aspects, but it can also be a different type of technology or a combination of both in order for what makes sense. Ultimately, I think the gathering of information and the tracking of information along one specific process, it's completely challenging in the traditional construction industry. There's a lot of moving pieces. And if you unify that into a process that is just transparent and clear and fun and easy to use, that's the ultimate goal. And I don't think it's like age oriented. I think it's just like user experience oriented.
That's very true. That's really good advice, Sophia. Thank you. And love your insights into not just 3D printing, but construction itself and the future of our industry. Thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge on the podcast. We're going to have to talk again soon.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it's really great to speak with you all the time.
Yeah.
And I watch a lot of your videos, so we do support like all of these ongoing conversation about something. It's something that benefits us all, and I feel very, very grateful for the invitation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sophia. We'll keep in touch.
Yes, thank you.